Welcome once again to Workshop Topics. This one's called My Old Smart & Brown Lathe, and in this first episode, called A Delivery and the Job Begins, you may be forgiven for thinking you're having a déjà vu. Almost 2 years ago I was quite busy relocating my workshop from the house that I'd sold, and at this particular time I was not in a very good financial state, to say the least, so I sold the Smart & Brown lathe to a very good friend of mine called Rob Metcalf. And with the help of a man called Simon Watkins from SWC Power Hire, the lathe was carefully transported into my friend Rob's workshop. This thing is really heavy. I do believe it weighs about 1.2 tons, and I wouldn't like to drop it on my foot. In fact, when Simon's hire was fully extended, it wouldn't lift it. I do recommend Simon for machinery removals. He's done a lot of this and he knows what to do. Very confident, very calm, and very obliging. This is a clip from one of the previous videos I made about moving the lathe. The first one was just getting it to the door from inside my workshop, and that took 4.5 hours, with a crowbar and bits of wood and metal rollers. And it actually went through the workshop's inner door with 1/8 of an inch to spare. That's because I built the inner wall and inner door to the workshop when this old and large Smart & Brown lathe was already in there. And now, almost 2 years later, the Smart & Brown is on the move once again. I bought it back from my friend Rob, and here it is once again on the back of Simon Watkins' truck, been carefully fitted into my current workshop, which is near York. It's looking a bit cleaner than it did the last time I saw it. Rob's been cleaning it up. After shearing off a couple of quite thick cutting tools, I think Rob decided that lathe work perhaps wasn't for him. There he is at the right-hand side, steadying the lathe as Simon lowers it into position. I've speeded the clip up a bit here because it took a while. And here, in my workshop, I would think is going to be its final resting place. Once the lathe was sat in the right place in the workshop, Simon removed the strapping and I switched it on. If you've been watching the Myford renovation and wonder why I bought so much nut-link belting, well, here's the answer. This lathe uses 2 belts and they're both very worn. I originally bought this lathe from a machine tool dealer in Halifax in 1995. This dealer had a very good stock, but unfortunately every lathe that I looked at I just couldn't afford. Then I saw this one sat in a corner and I said, "How much is that?" And when he said £650, I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea, because it looked in fairly good condition. But then the dealer explained that someone had thrown away the change wheels to drive the gearbox. Apparently he bought the lathe from a school, and the people at the school had thrown away the change wheels to drive the gearbox so that the automatics wouldn't work. The primary drive is just a 2-to-1 reduction, so I fitted a tooth belt system which has been fine for 26 years. This old tool room lathe has an oil pump, so oil is constantly circulating around the moving parts. It was originally painted blue, and I repainted the top half as well the same colour. Well, more or less. The Smart & Brown badge on the front of the lathe opens to reveal this large nut. This adjusts the motor tension. In my old workshop, once I put this lathe in position, I could not get to this part. On the right-hand side, this is the double clutch and oil pump system. Thankfully, I do have a bit more space in this workshop, so I can get round the back of the lathe to service the double clutch oil pump and change the belts where necessary. The first job was to fit a couple of nut-link belts, which I've already done. Here's the gearbox fitted to this lathe, and this large knob on the front changes the threads per inch setting if you're screw cutting, and the rusty looking lever on the right hand side connects to either the feed or the lead screw. The lead screw is for thread cutting and the feed is for the longitudinal traverse of the saddle. When I first got this lathe, the gearbox had never been used, and the only thing I had to fix on it was a rusty ball bearing on the lead screw as it enters the gearbox. As soon as I bought this lathe originally, I built a 7¼ inch gauge titch locomotive to run around the garden railway that I was fitting in the garden. It's quite simple to use. You have a dial which has 8 positions. Then you move some levers into the positions as shown on this plate. And the good thing about this for me is there is no mathematics involved in cutting threads on this lathe. Having said that, to be honest, I mainly use the gearbox for variable speed traverse when I'm turning using the automatic traverser or the cross slide. I removed the cover for two reasons, one to show my friend Rob what was inside, and the other reason was to find out why the dial felt quite stiff and didn't move freely, and here is the answer. It would appear that the oil feed to the gearbox is not working. The only lubrication that I can see is what's left of the grease that I put on when I first partially rebuilt this machine. So there's no time like the present. I'm taking the gearbox front off. After I worked on this years ago, I sealed the cover using some silicone rubber, and now I'm freeing the seal by first of all using a Stanley knife blade to very carefully break the seal, and then a small screwdriver. You have to be very delicate when you work with cast iron, because even though it's very strong in compression, it isn't strong in tension. So just remember, when you're working on cast iron parts, be very gentle with them. They're not as strong as they would first appear. Slowly and carefully I remove the cover and put it on one side, and here I'm just cleaning off some of the silicone rubber. When I bought this lathe in 1995, the oil feed to the gearbox had just been chopped and folded over. The logic being that it's possibly not a good idea to lubricate the gearbox if it's never going to rotate. And at the time I never thought to check this component. This is just a set of 3 pipes that accept the oil feed into the gearbox and 3 nozzles that restrict the flow of the oil so that it doesn't just all go into the gearbox. Most of it needs to go into the headstock. All 3 of the nozzles were blocked. I dismantled the nozzles and cleaned out all the rubbish, and then they were okay, but it still didn't work. 2 out of the 3 pipes were blocked. When this part was made, the soft solder that holds the pipes into this block had actually blocked one pipe permanently. Solution: connect a piece of silicone rubber tubing to the blocked pipe, get my friend Rob to blow into the tubing. Then once the solder melted inside the pipe, it was blown out by the pressure of the air that Rob was blowing into the pipe at the other end. This job took quite a while. I just thought it was blocked nozzles, but you live and learn. With the system fixed back in place, it was time to test it, and thankfully it worked.
Yeah. I've just seen the first one dripping. Yeah. The second one. Come on, baby. Yeah. Yeah, second one. It's working. And the first one too. Yeah, first one as well.
This situation is ideal. The middle nozzle admits most of the oil because this is a larger area that needs lubricating. That's one job out of the way. Now I need to scrape off the silicone rubber, ready to refit the front of the gearbox, but I think I'll paint it first. And that's it for this first video about renovating the old Smart & Brown. I'll leave you with this shot of the gears revolving while simultaneously being lubricated. For the first time in 26 years. Oh, the shame of it. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.